Hey, here we are again for the CFFD way. Today, as we're approaching the winter, we were thinking, man, it's getting cold. Man. So we were thinking all those runners that are out there running and pounding the pavement or pounding the trail, what are they going to do when it gets cold out?
Nothing.
Some of them don't. And that's going to be one of the things we talk about is to not quit your training. Some of them are actually crazy enough to go out there. But today, not me. I won't be. That's one thing to talk about. Today we are going to talk about why endurance athletes should do CrossFit. We could frame it as should consider CrossFit, but we're going to say why you should do CrossFit. So typically endurance athletes are super good at their one sport, and they're super good and super efficient in that. And maybe they have multiple sports. Some endurance athletes do, a triathlete is going to bike, and they're going to swim, and they're going to run. They're going to do all those things. But a lot of people really like to run, and that is great for them. But today we want to talk about how, especially in the winter months, I think this is a great opportunity for some people to try, how doing something like CrossFit could benefit them come run season next year. So, we got a couple different topics we're going to go through and talk about why it could benefit them. We're going to start with variation. I think if we just talked about typically they're doing one thing or maybe three things, they maybe vary some aspects of that, but they're still doing that repetitive task quite a bit. So the first thing we're going to talk about how CrossFit could benefit them as far as variation would be our pace, or we like to call it in CrossFit metabolic pathways. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so what's kind of cool about this is obviously a lot of endurance runners, they just run, right?
Right.
6 miles, 10 miles, 5 miles, whatever, right? But where pacing, metabolic pathways, training different energy systems is really going to be beneficial is kind of like in a track setting, right? How maybe the 800-meter runners, 400-meter runners, they just don't go out and just run 800 meters or 400 meters, right? I remember being in track, right? I was more of a sprinter, but like running 400s and stuff, we would run intervals of 200s or intervals of hundreds, right? Yes. With different rest systems and all that. So where you might benefit from having to change up the 5 mile, 3 mile, 10 mile, etc. With those shorter time frames like we do in CrossFit, you'll definitely see a difference in a peak of performance.
I think there's a lot of runners that actually will go out and they'll run 3 miles every day.
Yeah,
that's their deal. And it's great, but I mean, just as far as not only they're getting a certain amount of benefit for that, but over time, when you just do the exact same workout every day, you're going to lose progress, not only in your training, but progress in how your body adapts to that training. And so changing up the pace. Runners will do this even. They'll change up their pace. So the runners that are trying to change their pace of running, they will run different intervals, basically hitting different metabolic pathways. Maybe they'll go run hills, or they will try to do some sprints and things like that.
Yep.
But still, they're in the same modality, just changing up the pace. And so along with the variation and changing up their perceived effort or pace, so going from a sprint to a jog to a run to a walk or whatever it may be, the other variation areas we can hit with using CrossFit are planes of motion. Go ahead and hit on that. I mean,
yeah, so I mean, runners run, right? Bikers bike, and that's all they do. So they're sitting usually in that linear plane of forward and back, right? Not a lot of lateral motion happens, right? Not a lot of up and down as far as like squatting, thrusters, things of that nature. So that's kind of what we're talking about, different planes of motion, different range of motion, and it's going to tie into other things, but injury prevention and things like that. It's going to help you be able to run better, sustain running, right? So longevity, so you're not going to be constantly getting hurt or constantly working through injuries, right? So those like lateral movements, things like that, it's going to help strengthen your joints, your ligaments, and
that's definitely going to transfer into something we're going to talk about later. And the planes of motion is very closely related to ranges of motion. And I'm always amazed when I see a super good endurance athletes who it's hard for them to just do even a body weight squat because of their range of motion. If you guys think about the range of motion of running, you might get that far. You never get a deep knee bend. You never really fully get the hip. Maybe during the cycling process they get it, but never weight bearing. And so to be able to push those different tissues into different ranges of motion also, and push the limits of the range of motion and not just stay in those 20 degrees of motion, is going to make the joint healthier, and we're going to get to the injury prevention later. The other variation component that we're going to see a lot of an endurance athlete coming into doing something like CrossFit is actually loading a movement, where a runner, endurance athlete, their load is their body weight.
Yep.
It's pretty consistent all the time. We're transferring so much, we're going to pull that right into how these three things, when we get into this next category, injury prevention, how that can let's just talk through how different planes of motion, range of motion, and loading a tissue can actually help strengthen stability. That range of motion can help avoid injury prevention. And because we're doing those variations, we'll get to this. Let's just kind of...
I think this is huge for runners in particular, where you're doing a motion so consecutively and so repetitively that, again, like joints break down, tissue breaks down, and you get put in a hole where you're injured, you're beat up, and you can't do anything, right? Where you might have a little bit of an ankle injury, right? So we might throw you into some upper body stuff or just anything, right? It's the variation of what we do. It's, for one, it's gonna help you stay healthy, but it's also gonna help you work through injuries and keep you doing something to where you're not bedridden or just like, oh, I'm out 6 weeks, I can't do this.
It's so often as a chiropractor in my clinic, I'll see endurance athletes come in and they feel like they're doing something wrong because they're getting injured. Quite frankly, they're not.
No.
Their running form could be good. Their position on the bike could be good. It's just the pure nature of the amount of reps they do in the exact same way. It's the repetitive injury. Now, people are not surprised to hear that a manufacturing employee could get carpal tunnel syndrome or a tennis elbow because they do the exact same motion over and over again. Well, when we do the exact same training every single day, that's the exact same idea. Is we're doing the same motion. We could be in a safe range of motion. It could be a safe load. It could be perfect technique, but because we're doing it so repetitively and don't change the tissue movement, it turns into a repetitive sprain, strain, injury. That whole cycle of development of a tissue is actually a breakdown of the tissue and then a healing of tissue. And so if we have a breakdown, healing pathway over and over every single day, we do get those layers of scar tissue into the fascial layers. I'm nerding out a little bit, but that can cause a lot of issues and pain. Again, you may be doing absolutely nothing wrong other than didn't have enough variation in what we were doing. So we add in some variation, and just the pure variation can decrease repetitive injury. Super good. So change stimulus comes along with doing sprint workouts, doing a loaded workout because we're changing the stimulation. We're doing sometimes we're moving our body in space or we're moving an object in space. In CrossFit that's our motto, is constant variation, and so that helps those repetitive injuries. Strength and stability. I think we're going to get into power production with performance, but to take an endurance athlete who already has a good cardiovascular base, they probably have a little bit of a muscular endurance, and to add some strength and power behind it is going to increase their performance. But also, if their quads are stronger, we're decreasing imbalances because we're going to start working posterior chain as well. It's going to make the hips and the knees and the ankles, everything's just stronger, and allow them to be stable.
Yeah, everything's a chain in your body, right? You got to think of it like an actual chain itself. And if there's one weak link in there, it's usually where those injuries come up. I got weak hamstrings, so when I try to have that force production of running, I tweak a hamstring, or opposite, I tweak a quad because I'm not able to fire those muscles correctly. So that's obviously where we do a lot of strength variations and lifts and certain things to fix and balance those deficiencies. So
that was the other part I actually forgot, the imbalances. So many times if we're doing a workout that it's so repetitive, we're going to overtrain a certain part of our body and undertrain another part of our body. So that we need a variation in training modalities and training movements so we can decrease the likelihood of imbalances. And so being able to do that for someone is going to be great. We're going to get to this topic a little bit later because endurance athletes don't like to hear that, but it's going to be surprising to you. All right, so the last component, or one of the last components we're going to talk about, is affecting an endurance athlete's performance. endurance athletes are good about building their miles and getting in the time and decreasing their pace. They're good about changing up maybe their pace. Some people will be good about doing some sprint workouts, some hill workouts to get that done. But when we can start to create power, range of motion, lean body mass, if you can push on that pedal harder because you've squatted over the winter, it's going to be easier to go faster, and you're going to have to use less energy to keep up that pace.
Less fatigue.
And your times are going to go down.
Yeah.
The other cool part is this no off season. I know a lot of you guys die-harders are going to go out and run in the snow and on the ice. You guys should, if that's what you like. But we have a great facility that's 70 degrees all the time, and it's warm.
It's nice.
And you don't have to take any time off. So rather than a lot of people, I feel like they kind of take off the winter or slow down a lot. So then they have to start in the spring and build their pace back up. Well, I almost bet whatever pace you have right now, you come train with us over the winter, and you're gonna be able to start come March, April with a very similar pace, almost no drop, and actually might start to see an improvement once you get back into regular running. So the no off-season component is gonna be super good.
For sure.
I think endurance athletes that love to run, love to cycle, love to do whatever, they're never going to stop doing that, and that's not what we're asking you to do even in the winter months. We have treadmills, we have things that you can do. You can go out and run still, but to mix this in is going to be a huge benefit to you for all the reasons we've reviewed. The curveball I'm going to throw you is that there's a lot of people out there that have found that once they start doing these things, they can actually start to decrease the volume of miles they're doing and maintain their performance. Now that is something that I'm not an endurance athlete, so that I'm not going to sit here and tell you that. But even as a non-endurance athlete, I can run a 25-minute 5K. I'll run a 5K 3 times a year, maybe, just because we try it too much.
We do long.
Not as much as we maybe should.
Nope.
Truth be told, we probably should do a little bit more than we do. But it would be interesting to see if people that are used to running, 40, 50 miles a week, if they could strength train and do some cross training, the runners like to call it, or endurance athletes like to call it. If they mix that in, could they run 20 miles a week and keep up the same performance?
Yep.
I think it could be possible to see that. And I think it's definitely possible. I'm gonna, before we wrap this part up, I'm gonna let you speak, and I'm gonna tell you some other things we have at the gym. You got anything else that we missed on this?
No, I think we did good.
Okay, so those of you that are endurance athletes and thinking about maybe CrossFit would be a good try, I would encourage you to get in here. We're gonna go ahead and offer up the opportunity for you to get a 1-year membership price, but only lock yourself in on a contract for 6 months.
No way.
I'm so surprised.
That's pretty awesome.
That is pretty cool. And I guess my thought process is you're going to love it so much, you're going to see the difference in your performance that you're going to keep doing it over the winter months and turn your 6-month membership into a 1-year membership. Now, we're not only CrossFit here at Anytime Fitness / CrossFit Fort Dodge. Although we've talked about CrossFit and how it can benefit you, some other things that we have that you're gonna love in the inside, we obviously have plenty of treadmills. We have a self-powered treadmill that has a curved surface. It's called an air assault runner. Super cool. It's a good alternative. I think it's actually harder than running normally. It's oddly enough. We have rowers you can use to, again, to change your stimulus. We have spin classes available. This planes of motion, we have a TRX class with Monica Shelley that if you utilize those TRX bands and get a lot of rotational planes of motion in, is going to help tremendously. We have a community of people that are going to push you all winter long so that it doesn't feel like you have an off season and you don't have a drop off in your pace at the, come springtime. You're not going to have to build all summer again to build your conditioning and your pace back up. You're going to be ready for season once it hits. All of those things said, I hope you endurance athletes see some value in what we were able to share with you today. If there's anything we can do to help you continue to perform and enjoy your chosen sport with some CrossFit, we'd love to do so. Peace out.